votre attention, s'il vous plaît. Nous allons commencer dans quelques instants. Alors, bonsoir à toutes et toutes. C'est avec grand plaisir que je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette 3e édition des Grandes Conférences Brian-Mulroney. Je suis Jonathan Paquin, le directeur de l'École supérieure d'études internationales, et j'ai le privilège d'animer cette soirée ce soir. Il y a un an, en janvier 2025, il faisait aussi froid, la température était aussi difficile, nous avons lancé cette série de grandes conférences, avec l'ambition de créer un espace de dialogue autour des grands enjeux internationaux qui façonnent notre monde, et Dieu sait qu'il y en a de nombreux et qu'ils sont manifestement de plus en plus nombreux. Depuis, nous avons eu l'honneur d'accueillir plusieurs invités. M. Bob Ray, qui était ambassadeur et représentant permanent du Canada aux Nations unies, ainsi que la générale Jenny Carignan, chef d'état-major de la Défense du Canada. À ce jour, plus de 500 personnes ont pris part à ces rencontres, et ce succès, me semble-t-il, confirme la pertinence de cette initiative et l'intérêt marqué de nos concitoyens pour des échanges ouverts, rigoureux et accessibles. Ce soir, nous aurons le privilège d'entendre l'honorable LLoyd Axworthy, ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada, entre autres choses. Monsieur Axworthy, je vous remercie d'avoir accepté notre invitation et je vous souhaite la plus cordiale des bienvenues parmi nous. Welcome. Permettez-moi également de saluer nos partenaires. Il y en a plusieurs sans qui cette initiative ne serait pas possible. D'abord, la Ville de Québec, le ministère des Relations internationales et de la francophonie, ainsi que Québec international. J'aimerais enfin souhaiter la bienvenue à nos invités, Mme Élisa Valentin, sous-ministre adjointe Europe, Indo-Pacifique et Affaires institutionnelles du ministère des Relations internationales et de la francophonie, Mme Sarah Tapia, directrice du Bureau des Relations internationales à la Ville de Québec, et M. Carl Viel, président-directeur général de Québec international. Notre rectrice, Mme Sophie Damour, prononcera le mot de clôture aujourd'hui dans le cadre de cette grande conférence. Merci d'être avec nous, Mme la rectrice. Je salue également la présence de M. Brian O'Gallagher, consul honoraire de l'Irlande pour le Québec, et de Mme Eugénie Brouillette, vice-rectrice à la recherche, à la création et à l'innovation de l'Université Laval. Je n'ai pas terminé. Je salue également les doyens-doyennes, les donatrices et les donateurs et nos partenaires philanthropiques dont l'appui contribue à faire de cette série de conférences un rendez-vous incontournable du dialogue public. Enfin, à vous toutes et tous qui avez bravé le froid et la neige, distingués invités, membres de la communauté universitaire, je vous souhaite la plus cordiale des bienvenues. Maintenant, j'invite monsieur, et là je ne vais pas me tromper parce qu'on a inversé l'ordre, j'invite M. Carl Viel, président-directeur général de Québec international, à vous dire quelques mots au nom du comité Québec-Capitale internationale. Monsieur Viel.
Merci beaucoup, M. Paquin. Alors, je ne sais pas si vous êtes comme moi qui, je dirais à peu près, une fois par semaine, une fois par 2 semaines, on est à nos écrans pour l'écouter, l'entendre à Radio-Canada et de pouvoir continuer d'apprendre sur plein d'éléments reliés à la géopolitique. Merci. Écoutez, on en parlait tout à l'heure, je suis le 3e, je ne vais pas dire, j'allais dire un mot, mais je vais changer, mais je veux juste remercier premièrement la Ville de Québec, l'initiative qu'elle a pris la Ville il y a quelques années déjà afin de créer ce comité Québec avec l'Université Laval, avec le ministère des Relations internationales et de la francophonie et Québec international. C'est la 3e conférence, donc elle me fait plaisir d'être ici pour représenter cette fois-ci le groupe. Mais je pense que pour nous, lorsqu'on a entamé les conversations avec les partenaires, c'était important de pouvoir, M. Paquin y a fait référence dans ses mots d'ouverture, mais entre autres de pouvoir soutenir des espaces de dialogue, de réflexion, de favoriser aussi le débat dans un espace public éclairé qui permet aussi d'offrir à notre communauté, qu'elle soit économique, universitaire, citoyenne, de Québec, d'avoir l'opportunité d'écouter, d'échanger, de participer à des conversations, parce que tout à l'heure, il y a aussi la possibilité pour les gens de pouvoir s'entretenir avec M. Axworthy, mais justement d'avoir cette chance d'accueillir à Québec des acteurs de premier plan, comme vous avez pu le constater avec les personnes que nous avons eues dans les 2 autres conférences. Et pour nous aussi, c'était non seulement de pouvoir d'avoir ce véhicule-là, mais d'assurer aussi le rayonnement de notre ville, de notre université, avec, comme je dis, des acteurs de premier plan. L'autre élément à travers ce comité-là, c'est justement de partager nos pratiques, nos expertises entre chacun d'entre nous, afin de pouvoir justement permettre à l'ensemble de notre communauté de bénéficier de moments comme celui-ci et de d'autres que nous faisons à travers l'année, que ce soit des missions commerciales, d'autres types d'événements sur lesquels nous avons la possibilité d'avancer et d'échanger justement pour permettre à tout le monde et à notre communauté de continuer d'avancer, de rayonner et surtout d'apprendre dans le contexte qu'on est ce soir à l'université. Donc, merci à chacun d'entre vous de participer de façon très active à nos rencontres et merci à chacun de contribuer. Merci à vous tous d'être ici ce soir.
Merci, M. Viel. Maintenant, pour nous présenter M. Axworthy, j'invite Mme Roxane Dubé, qui est diplomate en résidence à l'École supérieure d'études internationales et qui fut haute fonctionnaire au ministère des Affaires étrangères du Canada pendant de nombreuses années. Mme Dubé a longtemps travaillé avec M. Axworthy, donc elle est la meilleure personne pour nous le présenter. Mme Dubé, la parole est à vous.
Je vais faire une entrée solennelle, mais inquiétez-vous pas, ça ne sera pas long. On reconnaît maintenant ouvertement que l'ordre international n'est plus simplement sous tension, mais qu'il connaît une brisure. Dans ce contexte, les puissances moyennes, dont le Canada, sont appelées à s'unir en tant qu'architectes de la coopération, afin d'assurer l'application des fondements du droit international, tels l'égalité souveraine des États, le respect de leur intégrité territoriale et la défense des droits de la personne. Ce constat a été fait par notre invité de marque depuis des mois. Lui qui nourrit avec une crédibilité et une clarté peu communes nos réflexions sur le futur du Canada et du monde à travers ses écrits et son engagement public. LLoyd Axworthy œuvre depuis des décennies à bâtir un ordre international plus juste. Ministre des Affaires étrangères de 1996 à 2000, il acquiert une stature internationale exceptionnelle. Il devient l'un des principaux défenseurs du concept de sécurité humaine, plaçant la protection des personnes et non seulement la sécurité des États au cœur de la diplomatie canadienne. Il est mondialement reconnu comme l'un des principaux artisans de la Convention d'Ottawa sur l'interdiction des mines antipersonnelles, ce pourquoi il a été proposé pour le prix Nobel de la paix. Il a également joué un rôle central dans la création de la Cour pénale internationale, dans la lutte contre le recrutement d'enfants soldats et dans les efforts de non-prolifération nucléaire. Ces réalisations font de lui l'un des penseurs et praticiens les plus influents d'une diplomatie centrée sur les droits humains. J'ai eu le privilège de travailler avec LLoyd Axworthy pendant 10 ans et j'ai alors constaté le respect et l'admiration qu'avaient pour lui ses collègues parlementaires, tous partis confondus. Parce qu'ils avaient compris que, pour lui, la politique n'est pas qu'un exercice de pouvoir, mais une forme exigeante du service public, tournée vers la protection des plus vulnérables et la construction d'un monde plus pacifique. M'adressant plus particulièrement aux étudiants dans cette salle, je vous invite à voir les échanges d'aujourd'hui comme un rappel qu'avec engagement et persévérance, on peut véritablement changer le cours des choses. Merci.
Merci, Mme Dubé. Nous arrivons maintenant au plat de résistance. Nous accueillons un homme dont l'engagement en faveur du droit international et la protection des civils, comme le rappelait Mme Dubé, a profondément marqué le monde, et aussi la diplomatie canadienne. Mr. Axworthy, I invite you to join me on stage. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Je vous souhaitais la bienvenue à l'Université Laval il y a une minute. La première chose que j'aimerais dire, c'est que vous êtes un observateur aguerri des relations internationales. And you regularly comment on the global upheavals that we are witnessing. You notably publish political analysis on Substract, which I read with great interest. You also published your memoirs a little more than a year ago, My Life in Politics. It's an excellent read, and I'm promoting the book now. I read it from cover to cover, if you're interested, si vous êtes intéressé aux relations internationales, mais aussi, et peut-être surtout, à l'engagement politique. Je vous recommande fortement cette lecture. Hopefully, at one point, we'll see a French translation to your memoirs. So. That'll be great.
Okay. I think I should make you my agent here in Quebec.
Ce soir, j'aimerais m'entretenir de 4 principaux thèmes avec M. Axworthy. Les transformations de l'ordre international, la place du Canada dans ce nouvel environnement international, la sécurité humaine. Qu'advient-il de la sécurité humaine dans un monde où il y a de plus en plus de brutes qui nous gouvernent? Et finalement, la démocratie. So there are 4 themes that I would like to discuss with you tonight. The state of the international system, Canada's place in it, the weight of international law and human security in this new global context, and finally, democracy. Nos discussions vont durer 60 minutes. Elles seront suivies d'une vingtaine de minutes de questions de votre part. Donc, vous pourrez poser vos questions en anglais ou en français. Si vous les posez en français, je vais faire de mon mieux pour les traduire en anglais. Si vous êtes capable de les poser en anglais, n'hésitez surtout pas. Donc, prière d'attendre cette période-là de Q&A avant de poser vos questions. How are you doing? That's my first question. Comment allez-vous?
Pas mal.
Pas mal?
I even survived with my wife via rail trip from Ottawa to Quebec City with no delays. I mean, it was a good start. So thank you very much. And Jonathan, if I might just take the opportunity to first thank you for the invitation and your staff, Madame la Présidente, for the appearance, and for all of you for coming out on what in Winnipeg we would call a barmy night. And I do want to just share because it's an interesting honor for me to be asked to do the Brian-Mulroney lecture. I served for 12 years in the House of Commons with Brian. About 1 year as a minister and the rest on the other side of the bench. And I thought I would just share with you because I think he's really a stellar sort of part of our Canadian history. And after Brian was nominated and became the leader of the Conservative Party, as you might expect, inside our own sort of theology, we were asking ourselves, so what's he going to be like? And, you know, what are the sort of qualities and abilities? And when he became elected in the by-election in Nova Scotia, there was a lot of speculation about his first day in the House. It's always like your coming out party. And everybody thought, well, we're going to have a real sort of go-to-it on the Constitution, on the issue of provincial rights. And now I was sort of in the backdrop. I was the transportation minister at the time, And I was probably the last person that anyone would have thought would be engaged with the new leader of the opposition. So when the question period came, I sat back and as a spectator thinking I just enjoyed the show. And what was the first question from Brian was to the Minister of Transport on a world-shaking issue, the freight rates, the maritime freight rates. I defy anybody in this audience to tell me what they know about maritime freight rates. It so happened I just found out. And so Brian gets up and wants to know, when is the Minister of Transport going to get off his duffer and do something about correcting the uneven, unequal, sort of depressive way in which the maritime freight rates discriminate against maritimers. Well, sometimes you're lucky in politics, right? It just so happened that 2 days earlier, I had been in the Maritimes and had announced that we were making changes to the maritime freight rates. No one could ask for a better sort of response to it than that, and I think Brian, in his normal aplomb, managed to kind of move things on. But let's just say afterwards, he was always a little sort of like, why the hell did you know anything about the rates when I didn't? And about several years later, he was in Winnipeg for a fundraiser for a common charity we both had in common. And at some point, he kind of puts, how Brian was, puts your hand around your shoulder. I didn't know if he was going to grab my neck or twist my arm. But he said, how the hell did you know I was going to ask a question about maritime freight rates? I said, Brian, it's obvious. Somebody with your political skill would know the first thing you want to do is identify with the local issue. And therefore, he said, well, someone told you. I said, no. I said, what I show was my respect for your acumen, your sensibility, your common grassroots notion of politics. What else? What other questions could you have asked for your first entree? And I always treasure that as one of those moments in Parliament where you kind of you engage somebody and you find that there's a kind of a sense of rapport, a sense of connection. So I wanted to tell you that, and just as a footnote, I was inspired from that to talk to another prime minister who was a graduate of Laval, the prime minister I served under, yep. Mr. Kretchen.
Yep.
And he reminded me, which Madam President, I didn't know, but Laval is the home base of 3 prime ministers of Canada. So I said to the boss, I said, so what's behind it all? Here's the interesting answer. He said, human rights. I said, what do you mean? He said, look at the record. Louis Saint Laurent, directly involved in the creation of the UN and the UN Charter of Rights. His government was the major sponsor. Canada played a major role in writing the charter and in writing the human rights part of it. He said Brian-Mulroney was, without a doubt, the leader in breaking down apartheid in terms of the international concession. And he said, and when we were in government, we had our human security issue. And I give him a lot of credit. So I'm fascinated to explore what is the DNA of Laval that creates 3 Canadian prime ministers who all became vanguard leaders in the development of human rights for this country. And so I want to pay tribute to this university and this institution for the contribution they've made.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You grew up in Manitoba?
Yeah.
But I learned that part of your family has roots in Quebec City.
Uh-huh.
That was a pleasant surprise. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Because with me is my wife of 40-odd years, Denise Simard, whose father was a graduate of the Laval Law School in 1940. Yeah, he was in the war, so like everything. But anyway, and I had the opportunity later on to spend a lot of time. Now, Emile Semar was a Crown prosecutor, active lawyer, and as you can imagine, for me, he was also a major advocate of the Union Nationale.
Mm-hmm.
We had some very interesting dinner conversations, as you might imagine. But he also introduced me, as Denise has, I think, to seeing how what Quebec has brought to the rest of us as Canadians, and how much. And we, coming up here on the train, and we would stop at a station, and Denise would say, "Well, that's where my grandmother grew up back in, I don't know, 1880 or something." Well, Denise is not that old, but that means. But to me, it was an opportunity to really feel of how there can be. I don't see any two solitudes, and I really see the fact that that we've had an opportunity together to learn from each other, and one of the great occasions of my social agenda is every 3 years I see Mar have a family reunion close by Quebec City. So that's the connection, and it will continue to be. That's why we're here tonight.
Great. Before entering politics, you studied international relations extensively, and you earned a PhD in political science at Princeton University.
I did.
Not a bad place to earn a PhD from. So, sir, let's talk about international relations. There's a lot to say, a lot to talk about. I have a few questions here in my pocket. Not sure we will have enough time.
Can I tell you one other war story?
Of course.
As you know, Mr. Carney has recently given a very powerful speech and talked about the role of middle powers, right?
Yep.
When I was a graduate student taking a course in foreign policy at Princeton, we all had to do a thesis paper. And so Professor Edgar Furness, who was a former State Department guy, said, "So, Axworthy, what are you going to write about?" I said, "Middle powers." He said, "What's that?" Well, I said, "Well, it's what we are." And he said, "Well, I guess it's okay, but I'm going to take it to the class." There was, 14 others in my seminar. He says, "Mr. Axworthy wants to do a paper on middle powers." And everybody said, again, "What's that?" That's when I discovered I was a Canadian and not an American. But it was an opportunity as well to spend several years in the United States, really understanding this kind of credible dynamic of power and constitution that they have, but also that there was an undercurrent. I think, as Louise Penny would say, a black wolf alive in the United States, and I think that is something I've always carried with me. That we as Canadians have to understand, and of course we're watching it play out today, every day, on what's going on in Minneapolis.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the state of the international system.
Mm-hmm.
With my first question, I will ask it in French, and I can always do it in English if you want. Quel regard portez-vous sur l'état du monde en 2026, un an après le retour de Donald Trump in America?
Right.
I would like to hear how you assess the state of the world today.
Well, let me start by summing up a column I wrote last week for Substack. It said negotiating with a fruitcake. I guess that was an impolite way of saying you don't negotiate with somebody who doesn't have any ability to negotiate. It's simply a matter of cutting deals. And I think as Canadians, we're all quite sort of perturbed, adjusting. How do we've had this relationship over sort of well over 100 years, and although I think because I'm reading Louise Penny's recent novel about it, how in the small towns in the Quebec-Vermont border, a lot of those communities were built to be centers of militia to stop the U.S. invasion. And she also writes how in Vermont, they were also setting up to stop the Canadian invasion. Mm-hmm. So we haven't always been sort of cheek and jowl. But I think what we're finding right now is that we participated, as I said earlier, in an effort after the Second World War to how do you put straitjackets on power? Power is it's an essence of what makes the world go round, and in politics in particular, there's always the reach out and the use and the aggrandizement of, and some people get too much power, countries get too much power, and so part of the whole structure of our beginning in 1945 is how do you put restraints, how do you put rules, how do you put sort of institutions in place that hold people accountable, that try to provide. They're not perfect, and they haven't been perfect, but we've tried to slow down the efforts until very recently. And Donald Trump is one of several international personalities who have simply abandoned that kind of understanding that came out of World War II and the Holocaust and what happened in terms of the 20 million people who were killed in the war, things of that kind. And I was a kid growing up. My father served, as did my uncles. And 6-year-olds, you kind of figure, the psychologists say you learn a lot at 6. And I just simply came away that war and the abuse of power is something that needs to be restrained and held. And I think Donald Trump has no use for any constraints. He said it himself, the only law he obeys is what he believes and what his mentality is. Well, that shows we have a problem right to begin with. So I think we're learning how to, we talk broadly of elbows up and things of that kind. I think it's more for us a reckoning. How do we refurbish and redo and redesign those abilities to put restraints on international power and security so it's not ending up in the horrible sort of destruction, desecration, and death of thousands and thousands of people because a series of more elderly white males have a thirst for power. It's a hard reality, but I think this is going to be the task of Canada in the next time. And by the way, the place it should happen is here in the universities, where those ideas can, as you said, be properly brought forward for exchange.
It seems that there is no longer a shared narrative en Occident entre les principaux alliés sur notre avenir commun. L'ordre international libéral auquel vous avez personnellement contribué lorsque vous étiez au gouvernement, mais pas seulement au gouvernement, à l'extérieur de vos fonctions gouvernementales. Il semble que cet ordre-là soit vraiment mis à mal. Est-ce que, selon vous, the international order can survive to great power politics, coercion, predation? Do you think that we can make it survive for, an extra number of years, or you think that it's pretty much the end?
I think the death of the international order is overreached right now. I think that there's clearly events out there publicly, the threat to Greenland, what's happening in Ukraine and Gaza, in Sudan, in Myanmar. I mean, there's enough issues to know how much it's broken down. But on the other hand, we also have to think about how much it's made things happen and still does. The United Nations, often being scoured as a useless organization, and when it comes to the Security Council, it is. But we wouldn't have any rules on traveling with airplanes, sending cargo, dealing with disease, helping to support poverty, investing in environment and climate, if we weren't working on an international order. No, I think, and that's what I think we have to be really careful that we don't simply, throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use an old expression. And that's where I think that the perspective we have to bring to bear should start, by the way, with the United States. Because what we see happening in front of our eyes is a lot of Americans standing up to an increasingly fascist organization. There's no other way of putting it.
Yep.
I know Minneapolis. I mean, I grew up in Winnipeg. Going to college, we would go down to have exchanges with Mount Macalester College in St. Paul, go to Minneapolis to watch ball games, go to Minneapolis because the Met Opera would show up. And one of my political heroes growing up was Hubert Humphrey, who was a great liberal progressive senator from the state of Minneapolis. And as a liberal in Manitoba, I remember inviting him to come up in his retirement to talk about what it meant to be a liberal. So I watch what's going on, and I just feel the pain and of what's happening. And those are people that we have to continue to reach out to and support. I mean, they're fighting our battle too. They're fighting a battle for all of us against those in the world who want to suppress and dictate and be authoritarian. And that's where we begin our conversations, I think, as Robin. And it's, again, if I can use, I'm not pointing to particular, I'm saying, but that's where the universities have a huge role to play, providing those opportunities for exchange of ideas and conversations. And I feel badly. I mean, I have a very close friend of mine who, goes to Palm Springs in the wintertime. He can't go anymore because he feels uncomfortable. Well, we have, I think, a lot of space that we have to do in our own reckoning, and I think we can talk about that. But it means that when the Prime Minister Carney talks about, quote, middle powers doing things, we've been doing it since Mike Pearson put together a combination of middle powers to create peacekeeping as a UN function. And Canada played a very historic role in the years to make sure that we would provide protection for people. That was, that was not something that was done with the Americans or the Russians or the Chinese. It was done working with the Nordics, working with Mozambique, working with Chile or Brazil or Mexico. I mean, we middle powering has been our gig for a long time. And what we did do with it is to say, we have to improve in that order. Each step that we take that puts another sort of constraint against the abuse of power is what the order needs. And that's refurbishing has to happen. But we have to be focused on where do we do, and that we don't simply dismiss it as something that's disappeared and we have to start brand new. We have to build on the foundations that have been carefully curated over the last 80 years.
So would you say that Prime Minister Carney went too far last week in Davos when he said it's the end of the liberal international order, now it's power politics, we got to be at the table, otherwise we will be on the menu? So what's your assessment of Prime Minister Carney's speech?
I think it was a speech that needed to be given at Davos. I'm not sure it's a speech that you want to give at the UN General Assembly. It's a very different audience. And I think what he was saying to the elite groups that were at Davos, powerful business and economic people, that's what they had to hear, because they were still discerning whether it's better to simply sort of swallow up to Donald Trump on what he was doing as opposed to standing up. And I think that was a very important message. But when he talked about what's next, I mean, look, we all have our own sort of goals, but why aren't we talking about using that leverage we have as a middle power to start doing something really serious about the way climate is destroying this world? And the United States is one of the major wrecking balls. And yet we have an opportunity as a country to be the opposite in terms of the bringing opportunities forward. We have probably more sunlight and more wind than any other country in the world, maybe bar Algeria or something. We could, On the question of water, we are running out of fresh water in the world. Do you know that sort of 40% of cities in the world are now looking at running out of fresh water in the next decade? Well, what are we good at, Canadians? We know how to manage fresh water. We should be out there working with others to bring about that kind of a coalition, that kind of consensus and networking. And one thing, the other, which I think I can't elaborate on, but I would think if there was one risk and threat that we're just waking up to, and that's the application of AI and how it can overtake human judgment and human values and human operation. I agree. A lot of experts say, boy, this can do wonderful things in science and medicine and economy. It can also basically take over the governing of who we are and really begin to put human beings in not just in losing their jobs, but also losing their integrity and their sense of purpose as people. That you're not going to get rules on AI working with a small concert of other countries. You have to have a major international agreements. And you've got Donald Trump deliberately for his own purposes and is adding to his family wealth. It's wide open. Nothing's being constrained. That's where we should be sort of taking a lead to speak about that and come forward with proposals and start mobilizing. I mean, maybe we can get into a question about, but you know, as Canadians, I think one of the moments that I took great pride in as a Canadian is when we took the leadership on the banning and use of landmines in the world. It wasn't the Americans. We weren't working with the United States. We worked to try to bring them and put to the treaty. We weren't working with Iraq. We were working with 17 other countries around the world, with 9 other NGOs, and with a large number of civil society groups. We started working what we call civic diplomacy. That's what we did as a middle power, and we could be doing that now on some of these other big top-of-mind issues. And that's why I hope at some point the Prime Minister and then Parliament will lay them out so the Canadians will begin to debate and understand those things.
Well, let's move to the Ottawa Convention.
You want to get me off that? Yeah.
I'll ask it in French. Dans vos mémoires, vous décrivez la Convention d'Ottawa sur les mines antipersonnelles comme l'apogée de votre carrière.
Yes.
L'équivalent du sommet de l'Everest. C'est ce que vous écrivez dans le... C'était un pari risqué pour vous. Les Nations Unies n'étaient pas suffisamment... Il y avait de l'inaction aux Nations Unies. Yeah. Et votre équipe, notamment Jill Sinclair et quelques autres, ont dit « Let's try something different. Yeah. » And you said « Yeah, let's do it. » Et ça a permis d'aller de l'avant avec la Convention, à laquelle 166 ou 160 pays adhèrent et ont ratifié la Convention sur l'interdiction de l'utilisation, de la production, de la vente de mines antipersonnelles, ce qui a permis de sauver des centaines de milliers de vies de civils depuis 1997. Nice work.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
What's the... Quelle est la recette du succès dans ce type de démarche? Et pourquoi le Canada n'a-t-il pas réussi à reproduire d'autres moments Everest depuis 1997? Is it a matter of context, leadership? Is it a matter of funding? Prime Minister Chrétien invested $100 million to the initiative. Why is it that we cannot come up with new initiatives that are similar to what you and your team did in 96, 97? Easy question, right?
I'm going to start first giving credit to what you mentioned, Jonathan. When I became foreign minister, I've been around. By that time, I was a veteran. I'd been in elected office for, 15, 16 years by that time. And so I knew the game. And what I knew is that you don't achieve anything if you don't have an idea of what you want to do. transactional politics, to me, is a waste of time. It happens, and it's part of what you do on a daily basis. But if you don't say that I've been given this incredible privilege by people voting for you in office to do something with it that will make their lives a little bit better, or give them an opportunity that wasn't there, then what the hell are you in the game for? Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I came out of that background, but I was also a part of a government led by Mr. Kretschmer, in which that kind of notion of that we trace back to the Pearson years could be redesigned and narrated for that time. Remember, it was just after the Berlin Wall crashed, and all of a sudden, the old Cold War, which I grew up in, and had collapsed. So people then were talking about a new world order. What was missing is, what does it look like? I mean, what is the new architecture and design of that new world order? Well, fortunately, there were people in this country who were thinking about it. A group of them who were Foreign Service officials in the Department of Foreign Affairs. And when I showed up on the scene, Jill Sinclair and others had already been working on the idea that the horror of landmines around the world, which were killing and maiming 30 or 40,000 people a year, could be controlled. And there was a couple of surprises when I moved from the Department of Human Resources, when I went to Foreign Affairs. The first one, this is an aside, my normal lunch in, what was that, Place Portage, was a tuna fish sandwich in a wax bag and a Diet Coke. So I get to Foreign Affairs, and they take me up to the 10th floor, and the first thing they say is, do you want to eat in your dining room? Well, I said, okay. Sure. And then, this is what really kind of, Denise can say, I came home agog, said, do you want a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chardonnay with your salmon? Well, I mean, that was not exactly the kind of menu I was used to, but it brought me into a new world. But what happened that afternoon after lunch is that a group of people came in and said, look, we've been negotiating in Geneva with other countries to work on a treaty that's going to stop the use of anti-personnel landmines. And we've reached a stalemate. The big guys don't want a treaty. They like it the way it is. But the NGO community that's been pushing this, the campaign to ban landmines, so there's a stalemate. And there's about 10 or 12 other countries who think as we do that we should move. And I said, well, what are you recommending? And they said, well, why don't we ask our ambassador to invite a smaller group to come to Ottawa in 96, not 97, 96, to see if we can hash this thing out. I said, good idea, because, and we sort of corralled that into the notion of human security, the protection of people. To me, that was how we needed to redo or refurbish the notion of security, to take security not just as national security or armed security or hard security, but sort of a form of human security, protecting people. And there's nothing namby-pamby about it. I mean, it means that you go in, as we did in Kosovo, and you stop people from murdering others. Anyway, the issue of the landmine ban also became a sort of test case for us to work on. So we brought a group to Ottawa in December of 96, had their meetings, same results, that the stalemate, the paralysis, was the bigger countries like to use landmines, and a lot of countries who were being victimized by it in Africa and the Americas and other places said, get rid of them, and it was a stalemate. And so we met in my office with a group of the, well, I think where Roxanne can relate to this. She was part of this discussion. They said, Saturday morning, you're going to have to close this meeting. And we're going to have a nice, sort of gentle worded closing communique, but there's no action attached to it. I said, well, what kind of action is possible? And Ralph Sisician, who was the leader of that group, said, well, we're not sure we should raise this, but they said, Minister, there is an option that you could go up in front of the group tomorrow and say, look, we're tired of paralysis and stalemate. We want you to come back to Canada in a year's time and sign a treaty. I said, whoa, talk about breaking out of the diplomatic sort of routine and protocols. And I said, so give me some time to check on this. So we called the Secretary General's office, we talked to the Prime Minister's office, we talked to the civil society groups, but I was confident, and this is I hope some of your students here will want to go into public service. I was confident that this group of people knew what they were doing, and I said to them, so if we had invited people back, will anybody come to sign it? And they said, well, that's kind of up to you politicians to work it out.
Yeah.
But if you do, we'll deliver the goods and make sure the treaty works.
But it was risky for you.
Hmm?
It was risky for you.
Well, as Harry Truman said, the buck stopped here, right?
Yeah.
But I had 2 speeches when I went there Saturday morning, like this. And I will share this because my wife's there. She remembered this. Is that I think the Thursday night beforehand, we had visited a exhibit in Lansdowne Park that had shown about landmines with all the visuals and things that demonstrated in a pretty horrific way what they could do. And our son at the time was, 11 ago. And we were walking around and he was saying, what's this about? And I explained that this is a weapon that kills people. He's like, and he said, why is that happening? I said, well, we need to get we need to come to an agreement to stop making them there. Well, he said, aren't you the foreign minister? I said, yeah. He said, well, why don't you do it? I mean, how do you tell an 11-year-old that they're talking silly? But that stayed with me. And so Saturday morning, I got up and simply said, we have a stalemate, but we also have a strong commitment of a number of countries and their governments, a large number of civil society organizations, the International Red Cross, the United Nations sort of Commission on Refugees. We had our own coalition. We built our own network. Mm-hmm. And we said, we were invited to come back a year from now to sign a treaty in Ottawa. And there was a lot of work.
Yeah.
There was a lot of negotiation, but we worked as a team, governments, civil society, and international institutions. And even today, the casualty rate has dropped from 30,000 a year to 5,000 or 6,000. That's because some countries still use them. And tragically, Ukraine has decided to use them as an offset to what the Russians are doing. But that's okay. I mean, everything has its glitches. But it did show that you can refurbish the order and make it a little better than it was before.
Right. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you want success, you need money, you need determination, you need a broad coalition.
Yes. And
you need a team of people who sometimes will come up with crazy ideas that happen to be not that crazy.
Absolutely.
After all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Crazy actually helps sometimes.
I switch back to French. la notion de sécurité humaine auquel vous avez largement contribué semble s'effriter. It is eroding now. You mentioned Ukraine, notably. Les États ont ratifié, 166 pays ont ratifié la Convention d'Ottawa, mais récemment, certains États européens, Finland, the Baltic countries, Poland, se sont retirés de la Convention d'Ottawa, et les États-Unis, qui n'en font pas partie, ont décidé de redémarrer la production de mines antipersonnelles et des utiliser. How should we interpret this setback?
I think you interpret it as just the zigzag of the international order. I mean, people respond to their own domestic politics. I mean, one of the changes that has happened is that in the Eastern European countries, you've had right-wing governments elected. And they have very close ties with the Pentagon. The Pentagon from day one wanted to get rid of a landmine treaty.
Yeah.
They don't like anything that puts restrictions on what they can do. But it's only 3 or 4. And part of the problem, and I apologize if you think I'm being a little sort of rueful, but Canada didn't make much of a fuss about that. We didn't lobby or use our diplomatic efforts to try to find an alternative. Look, the reason you use a landmine now on the borders of Ukraine against Russia is just not to stop an invasion, but it's to be an early alert.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it sets things off. There's a lot of ways that you can better do early warning than having somebody pick a landmine, because 30 years from now, that same landmine is going to kill a young woman who's going to try to work in the field to plant potatoes. I mean, that's what we're up against. And so, of course, there's wins and loses, and there's pushes and pulls. But I'm thinking, if we simply give up on it and say, oh, God, the international order doesn't work anymore, let's not pay any time, we're going to do something brand new, you've given away 80 years of work of people. I mean, and you also mean that what exists now and is still there is still 160 countries who are supporting the International Treaty on Landmines. We will fall back into no rules on armaments, no rules on the use of aggression, no rules when it comes to the kinds of criminality that we have. And if I can just say that the thing that the landmine treaty gave to this country, first, remember, we brought 2,000 people from the wild around. Ottawa was the center of the world for that period of time because we were doing something. And it meant that from that point on, we had relations with all kinds of countries. We had built working communication, working cordiality. I mean, I must have met, I don't know, during that 5 or 6 days, close to 100 foreign ministers. We would talk together. We would have breakfast together. We would work together. We established a real active network. And we turned that network on the request of a major civil society group into helping promote the setting up of the International Criminal Court. And I have to say, and I don't often get, to me that was really a crowning achievement because it was so hard to do. That we actually moved the international legal order, which up to that time had focused on governments committing crimes, to actually saying now we're focusing on individuals committing crimes and holding them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it meant that the kind of thing that Adolf Eichmann did, to say, well, my government made me do it. Now you have to say, I'm sorry. And to me, there's a wonderful book by David Sands called 58 Londres, which is a story about Pinochet and how some brave governments and civil societies took Pinochet, who was responsible for countless murders in Chile, and held him accountable for a crime as an individual. And the court is still working today, but what happens is the Trump administration says we're going to sanction the judges on that court. One of them who happens to be a Canadian woman named Kelly Probst, who has been a long-time juror. And so I've had communication with her because they put a sanction that she can no longer use credit cards because the credit cards are controlled by the U.S. financial system. They can't get hotel reservations because they have a sanction against them. So the United States doesn't have to land paratroopers, but they are destroying that court by basically injuring and damaging the people who make it work. And damn it all, we should be standing up against that. Why do we let them get away with that?
Yeah.
That's what Canadians need to do.
Jenny, combien de temps nous avons? 1 minute.
Are we over our time? Huh?
I have about 5 or 6 other questions. We have 1 minute. Well, maybe quickly on the ICC.
Yeah.
La Cour pénale internationale traverse des moments difficiles. Le mandat d'arrêt contre Vladimir Poutine n'a eu aucun effet, no impact. Et le mandat d'arrêt contre Benjamin Netanyahu a mis en lumière l'hypocrisie de la Cour pénale internationale. Lorsqu'il s'agit de dirigeants non occidentaux, il ne semble pas y avoir de problème à ce qu'on les arrête. Mais dès qu'il s'agit de quelqu'un qui est des nôtres ou de l'Occident, ça semble être plus compliqué. Tout à coup, nos gouvernements, certains gouvernements se taisent ou d'autres critiquent la Cour pénale. Et ça, à mes yeux, ça fait écho à ce que le premier ministre Carney disait la semaine dernière à Davos. Vous me permettrez de le citer rapidement. Mark Carney disait, "We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves from convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, and that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods." I would like to hear your reflection on this issue and on the Prime Minister's statement in 30 seconds.
I will look at. It's very easy to say that these rules didn't work because there was exceptions to them. That's because we started from zero. 1945, we started building rules and institutions. Were they perfect? Were they 100% guaranteed? Were they not exemptions? I mean, we set up the United Nations, giving 5 powers the right to veto security decisions. But does it mean that we stopped trying to improve it? Does it mean we stopped trying to move from a system where individuals could commit crimes with impunity, or to one that was there? So I think it's a little sort of facile to say it didn't work. It has its problems, and there's no question that Donald Trump pulling out or attacking these things creates all that much more of a threat and risk to us. But we sure, as Canadians, we do not want to see these institutions be put on a junk heap. And something else, I mean, we can put our best brains in our universities and in our think tanks and in our political system to say, how do we come to grips, and how do we do it without the Americans? Or even better, let's continue providing an improvement, an enhancement of these international institutions so that the many Americans who are now fighting on the street against the kind of thing that Trump stands for know that they've got friends and they can be part of a risk. I mean, I think that I think we're kind of trashing the international order much too harshly and much too early. And I think, you know, it's a thing I used it with Roxanne's class, but it says that the arc of justice must follow the arc of understanding and empathy. And that, I think, is what Canadians have tried to do. And that's what we can provide as the alternative to the Donald Trumps of the world.
There are a lot of bad guys out there at the moment.
A lot of bad guys.
A lot of bad guys. And it was a real privilege talking to a really good guy,
Yeah.
someone who put his time, energy, put his heart in the defense of the right values and in the defense of democracy and human rights. And so, with that said, thank you again, mesdames et messieurs. Oh,
That's one thing. Can I just say one thing?
absolutely.
I thank you for the compliment.
Sure.
But I hope the thing that I was able to communicate tonight, that I wasn't working alone. There's people in this room who were part of that. There are people who passed on who worked for it. There were people in foreign affairs who worked on it. There were people in the Liberal Party. There were my friends. There's my wife and my family who supported me in those things. You know, you're not a solar routine.
No.
You're not a prima donna. You have to work, and that is the larger issue. That as Canadians, we can't play solo either, and we have to find. But let's do it for the right issues. And I would say that I would applaud what Mr. Carty said if he also said, but I'm going to use the same sort of metric to do something about the way the climate is destroying this world and bring together a coalition of middle powers and civil societies and scientists and others to come to grips with that issue. That's what we have to do, but not what we have to. We can do it. We've done it. This is no sort of lark in the dark, as they say. This is something Canadians are good at. And I just think now's the chance to show it.
Mesdames et messieurs, LLoyd Axworthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You stay there.
Huh?
Okay.
We're doing a Q&A? No?
Oh, yes, of
Yeah.
course. That's a Q&A.
Yeah. But you have to come on. Oh, yeah.
Je suis chanceux de vous avoir à mes côtés. We have a 20 minutes for the Q&A, 20 minutes pour une période de questions-réponses. Si vous avez une question pour M. Axworthy, je vous demanderai d'être bref, de vous identifier et de la poser en anglais ou en français. Monsieur, la parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour. Excusez. Paul Craig, j'ai été membre du Parlement pendant les mêmes années que M. Axworthy. Je peux témoigner de ce que Mme Dubé a dit, qu'effectivement, comme ministre des Affaires étrangères, nous avions tous un très grand respect pour le travail qu'il faisait, même si moi, j'étais au Bloc québécois dans un parti d'opposition. On avait l'impression à ce moment-là qu'on pouvait travailler sur des choses non partisanes de façon très significative. Ma question, c'est, M. Axworthy, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire, chacun de nous, comme citoyens, pour être capable de donner le courage à tous nos élus d'avoir une position réfléchie par rapport aux folies de M. Trump? Le média actuellement, les médias font des caricatures. Et moi, j'aimerais savoir ce que vous souhaitez que nous fassions, soit comme anciens parlementaires, soit comme citoyens, pour être capable de donner de la force à nos élus, de faire face aux 2 années qui restent. Parce qu'après ça, il ne sera plus là.
Merci beaucoup. What can we do to come up with a common front among politicians in Ottawa, but also in the civil society? What can we do to fight back the current administration in the United States? And I think that the comment was really positive when the gentleman said, in 2 years, Trump's going to be gone. I'm not convinced, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, the gentleman was also a comrade
Yes.
along the way, and I thank him for his comment. Can I use I have something I want to say, and I didn't have an opportunity. You think I had everything I spelled out. When we were working on the human security agenda, peacekeeping, international courts, the whole issue of human rights, women's rights, the community in Canada that had the strongest level of support for what we're doing was here in Quebec. It was an important voice, and I can name some of the people who were leading that. And I think that I'm not a sociologist or even an anthropologist. All I can say, and I think that Roxanne who worked with me in Quebec, is that when we were, getting some hassle and some pushback, let's say something like Jocelyn Coulon, we set up a major peacekeeping center in Montreal under his tutelage to work on women in peacekeeping.
Avec Jocelyn Coulon.
Yeah, and there are people from this university who were involved in this, and I'm saying, I'm almost making an appeal. We need this voice from Quebec again on these issues. We really do. And I'm not saying that it has to be cut and dried as to the things I'm talking about, but it's a powerful voice. Let me give you another example. In 2001, when Americans were putting huge pressure on Canada to go into the Iraq War, 30-some-odd Liberal members of Parliament told the Prime Minister that if we did that, they wouldn't vote for it. That shows that the political system was working. That was reflecting what they thought their constituents wanted. And what I'm saying, because you are a Quebec audience, is that there's a voice that we need coming from here on these issues. And we have to think, to put it in that broad perspective. Do you want to use the word unified? Yeah, I would say common front. We work together to make sure these things happen. And I think that, again, I come from the prairies, and it's a pretty conservative place. But there are, as I said, connections that we have, and I always treasure the fact that when I was, slogging away on human security stuff, the members of Parliament from this province and members of civil society from this province were out there, with my back. And so I want to pay tribute to them, but I'm hoping that that can be sort of resuscitated and come back on the kinds of issues that we've been talking about tonight, because it is a powerful voice, it's a powerful political factor, and it is also something that I think that does come back to the history of places like this, where, as you say, you have 3 prime ministers whose major accomplishments were in human rights issues. Hey, come on. I spoke to a group of young students today, and I thought, I could pick out 2 or 3 of them that could do that job. So anyway, but please think about that, because from someone from another part of Canada, we need your voice.
Merci. Madame, la parole est à vous. Veuillez vous identifier aussi. Merci.
Du coup, bonjour. Je m'appelle Kathleen. Je suis étudiante en maîtrise en relations internationales. Et du coup, ma question est, dans le contexte géopolitique actuel, selon vous, le Canada devrait-il repenser son approche sur le libre-échange? À l'heure actuelle, c'est quelque chose qui est déjà d'actualité avec Marc Carney qui en a parlé le 16 janvier. Et là, il y a une revision du libre-échange entre le Canada et certains pays. Et moi, je voulais savoir, est-ce que vous pensez que pour vous, le Canada devrait repenser du coup une autre vision du libre-échange en vue des contextes géopolitiques, avec par exemple les États-Unis, le Mexique, etc.
Merci, madame. Should Canada rethink its strategy with respect to free trade, knowing that things are extremely complicated with the Trump administration? We don't know if CUSMA will be renegotiated or not. So should we diversify? What should be our free trade strategy?
You're asking the question of someone who was the liberal trade critic during the time of the free trade debate in 1988. So I bring a little history with me. The word diversification is kind of fairly, it's become a cliche almost. Who are you going to diversify with? And right now we're focusing on establishing more better contacts with Europe. To be honest, I'm a little wary about that. But where I think there is very large room for us to begin working on is in the Americas. with Mexico and Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
And others that we can name, Colombia. First, it's a way of sticking straight on Trump's view that he is the master of the hemisphere.
Mm.
Well, that was last expressed in 1808 or something, the Monroe Doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
But we should be working with the Caribbeans and with the Central Americans as much, using our diplomacy. I mean, we're good at that. But why aren't we, the Caribbean, look at the Caribbean and the Americas together represent 700 million people. And that is an enormous combination of opportunities to start using our skill, our know-how, our services, our utility. But we don't even bother visiting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Caribbean used to be, when I was in government, Mr. Kretchen appointed a junior Secretary of State in Foreign Affairs to work in the Americas and the Caribbean. Specifically, we worked the street. Let me show another example. There are some 70-odd countries in the Francophonie who represent all different parts of the world with different economies and different outlooks. We've let Francophonie kind of, we go to the meetings, but not much happens. Here's an opportunity to provide a diversification unbelievably. I mean, that is over 1 billion people who speak French. We're part of that, and it's been around a long time. Canada has a good reputation. We know what we're doing. Quebec has taken the lead in many of these cases, have offices there, but we need to have a strategy. What do we want to do? But in the meantime, let's be blunt, we've announced a major cut in our development assistance, so we can't help sort of places like Haiti and others the same way we should. And our diplomacy. I mean, why, when you are trying to diversify your connections, your relationships, your coalitions, you're cutting back on your diplomatic capacity and cutting back on the soft power that development provides for you. And so I think, same thing with our Commonwealth. We're doing the same thing. In the 90s, the Commonwealth of Nations established a ministerial group that which I was a member, that we were given the mandate, and Mandela and they did the meeting to set this up to go after countries which tolerated or accepted military coups or takeovers or political disruption. So we took on Nigeria, we took on Gambia, we took on Pakistan, and we were out there kind of as a kind of a ginger group, and saying, but in the meantime, I mean, I spent a lot of time dealing with Nigeria, but we basically recommended that they be put on leave from the Commonwealth, and they were very upset. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of naming and shaming and belonging and stuff, those are all important diplomatic tools that we have to use. And so we've got two major, wide, diversified international groupings that we're not taking advantage of, we're not visiting, we're not setting up a special minister to go. I mean, okay, I made my point. I hope that helps answer your question.
Nous avons le temps pour une dernière question, malheureusement, pas plus d'une question. Qui est arrivé en premier?
Les femmes en premier.
Je vous invite à poser votre question à M. Axworthy tout à l'heure lors du cocktail. Merci. Madame, vous avez la dernière question.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you very much for your intervention tonight. My name is Clotilde. I'm a student at ESE. My question is maybe a little hard, but sometimes when we think about what we can do, because you said the system is not completely broken yet or not completely blocked, so sometimes we think about reshaping the UN or something. Do you think it's possible? And if we do, should we try to include more non-Western visions? Because when it was created back in 1945, there was not as many countries as there are today. So should we include everybody? Is it technically possible? What should we do? Is it even possible? I know it's a hard question.
Thank you.
So,
So,
give me a little more I didn't hear that.
okay, sure. So, you were talking about UN reform,
One. Yeah.
and you are wondering whether we should make sure
possible.
that
Yeah.
newer countries that were created following decolonization should play a larger role. Is that the sense of your question?
Yes, basically it's like when we built the UN in 1945, we
Yep.
didn't have as many countries that we have today. So is it possible to include everybody and especially like non-Western vision?
Right.
Because that's a criticism we have a lot about the UN.
Do you mean in the Security Council, or because they're all represented at the UN General
I know,
Assembly?
but it's like if we think of
Some-
like changing
Oh.
the UN because we
And you're not talking about Trump's Board of Peace, right? Okay. Okay. So,
I know. First, I think you've put your finger on a really important question mark about the United Nations. Everybody takes a whack at it, and they're certainly reducing all their budgets as we are. To what purpose? To meet Treasury Board instructions, or to say we have to do something to fill the gap that the Americans are leaving by pulling out all their support. Security Council reform, there's a major movement underway by smaller, medium-sized countries in the UN to say that the veto power should not be used in cases where there is a humanitarian crisis or conflict. We're pretty quiet on it. There are certain kind of individuals in our global affairs at the legal department who think that's not our business. Well, of course it's our business. We have a new ambassador, a Montrealer. Maybe that's not a good idea for the Quebec City audience. But I've asked this question several times. What mandate have you given him as a new ambassador? Well, we don't know. Has he been asked to lead Canadian efforts to transfer the veto from something that can be used for any purpose to ones that are being used for specifically cannot be used where there's a self-interest, national self-interest at play? Is there something that we should be doing about the issue of development? Say, let's reform development, but if you take away all the funding for health, how many germs and viruses will be transmitted across boundary lines in the next 4 or 5 years because you're not controlling diseases in other places? I mean, we are subject to a lot of clunky thinking about these things. And I think the UN, and I spent a lot of time, and I love being there, but I also recognize its weaknesses. And I would say that the best thing that Canada could do right now is to start a movement to elect a woman as Secretary General.
encore une fois, Monsieur Axworthy, merci infiniment.
Thank you.
You stay at your seat.
You
Stay there. Yeah, I'll be back.
Oh.
I gotta use the other mic.
Oh, okay.
Okay. OK. Pour la finale de cette 3e édition des conférences Brian-Mulroney, j'invite maintenant la rectrice de l'Université Laval, Mme Sophie Damour, à venir prendre la parole pendant quelques minutes. Madame la rectrice.
Merci, Jonathan. Mr. Axworthy, thank you so much. Thank you for being sensitive, wise, calm, and genuine. And thank you for sharing history. It's important that we remember that people before us did big things, faced big problems. and find ways at the time to deal with those. And I think that you made all this clear tonight, expressing your own experience and sharing with us and addressing the very difficult situation and complexity we are all facing today. So I really want to thank you for that. Le monde dans lequel on vit est certainement challengeant. On a discuté s'il était brisé ou arrivé à un point de rupture. Il est tendu. On peut certainement dire ça. L'échiquier géopolitique bouge, il bouge vite à tous les jours. Il épuise, il fatigue, je dirais même. Et on a la chance, et je veux souligner le travail incroyable de Jonathan, de tous les collègues de l'École supérieure en études internationales, du partenariat avec la Ville de Québec, avec Québec International, avec le gouvernement du Québec. Je veux vous remercier de nous permettre de tenir des échanges de cette qualité, de cette nature ici à l'Université Laval et de permettre à un grand public d'y participer. Et on le sait, les enjeux internationaux sont complexes et interconnectés. On sait que Jonathan, avec tout son talent, arrive quand même à nous l'expliquer le lundi à la télé, Radio-Can. Mais quand même, ça demande beaucoup de rigueur, d'ouverture, de dialogue. Ça demande de la diplomatie pour être capable d'étudier ces questions, de remettre en question nos certitudes, de faire ce que vous aviez fait à l'époque. Comme vous avez dit, we tried something new in diplomacy. We didn't use the playbook of the time. We decided to do something new and it worked. Vous nous avez... alors, c'est ça, les grandes conférences Brian-Mulroney. L'université, évidemment, se veut un espace de réflexion libre, un espace de confrontation d'idées, de débat, de nouvelles idées. C'est ce qu'on fait à l'université. Un lieu où on prend le temps aussi ensemble, même quand il fait tempête, de se réunir et de se rassembler. C'était la 3e conférence Brian-Mulroney, mais je dois dire encore une fois que la mission est accomplie et c'est une mission essentielle. Je termine en rappelant quelques idées fortes que je retiens et très rapidement de l'intervention de ce soir. Peut-être pour mon plaisir à moi, mais I'm going to do a few words on what I'm taking home tonight.
Yeah.
And probably for my own pleasure, I wrote fruitcake with a big circle around it. So I think we're all going to keep that in mind, but in the wise way that you brought it up, and the difficulty to negotiate with a personage like Mr. Trump and his crowd. Vous avez beaucoup mis l'emphase sur ce que le Canada peut faire, ce que les Canadiens peuvent faire, ce que les politiciens peuvent faire. Et en psychologie, c'est très, très important ce que vous avez fait parce que on a besoin d'être rassuré dans une situation très difficile. C'est plus facile d'avoir peur que de décider de prendre action. Alors, de nous rappeler que c'est pas parce qu'on est a middle power, j'ai pas le mot exact, une puissance moyenne probablement en français, qu'on est démuni et qu'on n'a pas le talent de la diplomatie et de nos propres capacités pour faire avancer les choses. Et c'est un message très puissant. Vous avez fait référence à des actions qu'on devrait prendre, l'action climatique. Vous avez parlé de l'eau. Vous avez dit qu'on a été capable et on est encore capable de consensus, de coordination. Vous nous avez dit, peut-être que l'IA aussi est est une perspective qui appelle à des règles et des règles qu'on établisse ensemble, qu'on établirait ensemble. Vous nous avez mis sur la perspective d'un front commun et de l'importance de regarder autour de nous. Et on a des alliés et on a des forces. Je vais parler des Amériques, des Caraïbes, de la francophonie. Et tout ça dans une perspective d'établir notre propre stratégie. Alors là-dessus, écoutez, encore un énorme merci. Merci au public. Merci d'avoir été là. Et je nous souhaite une belle suite ce soir. Merci de rester encore quelques temps avec nous pour permettre aux gens de vous poser quelques questions. Je suis certaine qu'ils iront vous rejoindre. Merci, Jonathan.
Merci. Merci, Madame la rectrice. Alors, c'est ce qui met un terme à cette troisième grande conférence. Avant de se quitter, j'aimerais simplement rappeler à ceux qui représentent Québec international, le MRIF, la Ville de Québec, de rester dans la salle pour une photo officielle with Mr. Axworthy. Et pour vous, mesdames et messieurs, nous vous invitons à vous diriger vers l'atrium du pavillon, tout près d'ici. Il y aura un cocktail. Nous irons vous rejoindre dans 3 ou 4 minutes dès que la dite photo aura été prise. J'espère que vous resterez avec nous pour le cocktail et je vous dis à l'automne prochain pour une prochaine grande conférence Brian-Mulroney. Mr. Axworthy, thank you so much for everything. It was lovely. Thank you.